This video was created by the Brazilian creator Giovanni Kelvin. I kindly ask for your support by subscribing to the channel and sharing this story with others, so we can bring our work to even more people around the world. If you've ever felt like the ocean knows your secrets, you're going to understand every word of this story. Stay until the end because this one will break you before it puts you back together. Like the video, subscribe, and don't go anywhere. You won't regret it. The flashbulbs hit Diego Rios like a second shipwreck. He stood at the entrance of the Veracruz Port Authority building wearing borrowed clothes 3 sizes too large, his beard wild and salt-scorched, his hands still bearing the cracks and calluses of 76 days alone on the Pacific Ocean. The journalists were shouting his name. The cameras were everywhere. Someone thrust a microphone so close to his mouth that he could have bitten it. "Mr. Rios, how does it feel to be alive?" He looked at the reporter, young, eager, completely certain she already knew the answer. "Ask me again when I'm sure I am," he said. That was not what they wanted. They wanted tears, gratitude, a story about an invincible man who had stared down death and come back victorious. The kind of story that confirmed what everyone already believed about men like Diego Rios, that power floats even when boats don't. Instead, they got silence. They got a man who had been alone with himself for 2.5 months and found the experience deeply inconvenient. His lawyer, Rodrigo Peña, materialized at his elbow and steered him toward a waiting vehicle with the smooth authority of someone who had spent 11 years managing Diego's collateral damage. Inside, the air conditioning was arctic. Diego stared at his own hands in his lap, cracked, darkened, still carrying the memory of salt and rope and desperation in every knuckle. "The board wants to meet tomorrow morning," Rodrigo said, already scrolling. "The investors have been patient, but they need to hear from you directly. Your mother has called my office 14 times since the Coast Guard made contact. The PR team wants to schedule a formal statement, something warmer than what you said to the reporters just now." "Rodrigo." "Yes? I need you to find someone." Rodrigo looked up from his phone. He recognized the tone immediately. It was the voice Diego used in negotiations when the deal was already done, and he was simply informing the other party of the outcome. "Who?" "A woman named Valentina Cruz. She worked in the janitorial services department at Rios Maritime, night shift. She left the company approximately 8 months ago or was removed. I need to know where she is now, what happened to her, and why she is no longer in the official employee records." The silence in the car lasted 3 full seconds. "Diego," Rodrigo's voice was careful, "you've been at sea for 76 days. The company nearly went into crisis without you. The investors are. She is my immediate attention." Rodrigo made a note on his phone without asking further questions. It was, Diego had always felt, one of his most valuable qualities. Outside the window, Veracruz moved past in flashes of familiar color. The port, the Malecon, the old buildings with their painted facades peeling in the salt air, the particular golden-green light that the Gulf of Mexico threw across everything in the afternoon. He had grown up in this city. He had built everything here. He had nearly died somewhere between here and the coast of Jalisco, and somehow all of it, the empire, the offices, the accounts, felt like someone else's furniture. Only the journal felt real. On the 47th day adrift, Diego had found the debris field at dawn. He had been awake for 19 hours, keeping himself conscious through sheer stubbornness and an unreasonable amount of spite, using a piece of deck railing as a makeshift paddle. The emergency rations were gone. The water pouches were down to 3. His yacht, the Veracruz Azul, the pride of the Rios fleet, the boat he had taken alone into the Pacific on what his assistant had called a reckless and unnecessary vanity trip, existed now only as scattered wreckage on an ocean that had no interest whatsoever in his net worth. The debris he spotted belonged to a smaller vessel. A fishing boat, he guessed, from the pale blue paint on the splintered wood. Life preservers, a broken cooler, tangled netting, and one sealed plastic container wrapped in layers of electrical tape that had done its job faithfully against the sea. Inside the container, a notebook. Water had reached the outer pages. The corners were soft and swollen, but the center, 40 or 50 pages worth, had survived intact. The handwriting inside was precise and deliberate, the writing of someone who had been trained to value exactness. He recognized the quality of it without being able to name it at first. This was not casual journaling. This was documentation. He read the first page and did not move for a long time after. "If someone finds this, please find my daughter. Her name is Camila. She is 4 years old. She lives with my aunt Carmen Ruiz in Oaxaca de Juarez, Oaxaca. Tell her I tried to come home. Tell her I loved her more than I ever learned how to say. Diego Rios had not cried in 20 years. He was not a man who allowed himself that particular luxury. He had been raised in a household where emotion was managed, not expressed, and had spent his adult life perfecting the art of controlled affect in every room he entered. He cried there, alone on the Pacific, with a dead woman's notebook in his sunburned hands. He read every word of that journal over the next 11 days, not because he had nothing else to do, though he didn't, but because Valentina Cruz had written the way people write when they believe no one will ever read it, completely, without the performance of strength. She wrote about years she had spent building a career in maritime law, about the firm where she had worked before something happened that she described only in careful fragments and deliberate understatement. She wrote about her daughter. She wrote about her Aunt Carmen, who had taken Camilla in when everything fell apart. She wrote about the job she had taken afterward, the only job that would have her, cleaning offices at night in a maritime company in Veracruz. His company's name appeared on page 12, Rios Maritime, Veracruz. I worked there for 3 years. I kept my head down. I did the work. I thought if I disappeared into the walls long enough, they would forget what I knew, and I could find a way back to Camila. And then, 6 lines lower, in handwriting slightly more unsteady than the rest, I trusted him. I shouldn't have, but I did. Him. Diego read that pronoun 17 times and understood something different about it each time. He found her on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after his rescue. Not through Rodrigo's search, though Rodrigo was working on it with characteristic quiet efficiency. He found her because he did something no one in his organization expected. He arrived at 6 in the morning and walked every floor of the Rios Maritime headquarters building in downtown Veracruz. 11 floors. Every corridor. Every department. He stopped to shake hands with the security guards at the entrance, to learn the name of the woman who ran the mailroom, to ask the kitchen staff on the 4th floor how the temperamental coffee machine had been behaving. His executive assistant, a meticulous young man named Tomas, trailed behind him with barely concealed bewilderment. "Sir," Tomas said, somewhere around the 3rd floor, "you have a board presentation at 9. We have time. The investors' call is at 11 and the legal team." "Tomas, I know my calendar." She was on the 3rd floor. He almost missed her. She was moving with the deliberate efficiency of someone who had learned to complete work quickly, and without drawing attention, pushing a cleaning cart between the glass-walled conference rooms, with the focused attention of a person who takes invisible work seriously, the gray uniform of the contracted cleaning service. Dark hair pulled back under a simple headband. No earrings. Eyes directed downward toward her task. He had seen Valentina Cruz's employee photograph in her personnel file, which Rodrigo had quietly obtained from HR. The woman in the photograph had longer hair and a direct gaze and a particular quality of self-possession that read, clearly, even through a company ID shot. This woman's hair was different. Her posture was smaller. She had practiced how to become forgettable with the dedication of someone whose life depended on it. But there was the jaw, the specific angle of concentration she carried when she was focused on something. The way she moved, not like someone performing the work, but like someone who was genuinely thinking about it. Diego stopped walking. Tomas nearly walked into him from behind. "Excuse me," Diego said. She turned. The expression she produced was precisely calibrated. Polite, neutral, professional. Not the face of someone who was afraid. The face of someone who had decided well in advance exactly what face to show and to whom. "Good morning. Can I help you with something? What's your name?" A pause. Half a second. Anyone else would have missed it entirely. "Marisol Vega. I'm with Limpex Servicios, the contracted cleaning company. Is there anything you need, sir?" He studied her. She held his gaze with a particular steadiness, the deliberate steadiness of someone working to appear calm, which looked almost identical to actual calm but was not, quite. Someone genuinely at ease would have glanced away first. Only someone carefully managing a reaction holds eye contact with that specific, controlled quality. "No," Diego said. "Thank you, Marisol." He turned and walked toward the elevator bank. He waited until he had rounded the corner, then pressed his back against the wall and stood very still for a moment, organizing what he knew with the methodical certainty of a man who had spent 76 days with nothing to do but think. It was her. He didn't know why she was here. He didn't know what she believed about him, or what she had survived, or how she had ended up working in his own building under someone else's name. But he knew, with the bedrock certainty that 76 days of silence had burned into him permanently, that the woman who had written those 67 pages was alive and 40 feet away, and that he owed her something the balance sheet of Rios Maritime could not begin to address. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to Rodrigo. "Stop the search. I found her. Tell no one." Then he walked back around the corner. She was still there, cleaning the glass partition of the first conference room with careful, even strokes. She didn't look up at the sound of his footsteps, but her hands slowed, barely perceptibly, and then continued. "Marisol, sir, I'm having my office on the 15th floor service today. Full cleaning, top to bottom. I've been away for a while and it needs serious attention. I'd like to request you specifically." She looked at him then, really looked at him. Not the polite surface glance she had offered before, but the measuring look of someone calculating risk and distance and available exits simultaneously. "I'll need to check the schedule," she said. "I already checked it. You're available at noon." A beat of silence. "Please don't be late." He could see her processing, weighing the cost of refusal against the cost of compliance, measuring what a cleaning employee named Marisol Vega would reasonably do when a CEO made a request, against what Valentina Cruz would do in the same situation. "Of course," she said, her voice was perfectly even. "Noon. Thank you." He walked to the elevator and pressed the button for 15. As the doors closed, he caught a last glimpse of her, still facing the glass partition, resuming her work with the same careful, deliberate strokes. She would come at noon because she was too smart not to. She understood that refusal would draw more attention than compliance. And he would be there, waiting, with 67 pages of her own words in his memory and a question he didn't yet know how to ask. What do you say to someone the ocean sent you? He supposed he was about to find out. The 15th floor office of Rios Maritime occupied the entire south-facing corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the port of Veracruz and, beyond it, the Gulf of Mexico, a view Diego had once considered a symbol of everything he had earned and that now, 11 days after his rescue, simply reminded him of how large and indifferent water was. She arrived at noon precisely. He knew because he was watching the door. She knocked, 3 measured professional raps, and entered when he said come in, pulling her cart with the same efficient economy of movement he had noticed on the 3rd floor. She scanned the office in one quick, comprehensive sweep, catalogued it without expression, and moved to begin with the windows. Diego did not look up from his desk. He had learned, in 11 years of running a company and 41 years of being alive, that people behaved most naturally when they believed they were unobserved. The office was genuinely in need of attention. 3 months of fine coastal dust on every surface, a dead plant in the corner that his assistant had apparently decided was not his professional responsibility, stacks of documents the board had placed on the conference table during his absence, each pile more alarming than the last when considered carefully. He watched her from the corner of his eye. She worked with the methodical precision of someone who had a system and trusted it, left to right, top to bottom, nothing overlooked. When she reached the conference table, she moved the document stacks with careful hands, cleaning beneath them and replacing each pile in the same orientation she had found it. Not mechanically, thoughtfully. She noted the weight of each stack, adjusted accordingly, returned everything exactly as it was. Most cleaning staff treated documents as obstacles. She treated them as things that mattered to someone. "You can leave the conference table," Diego said without looking up. "It needs to be done." Her voice was calm, not defensive, simply factual. "I'll be working there this afternoon. I'll finish before you get there." He looked up then. She had her back to him, attending to the far edge of the table. "I've been told the previous cleaning service was inconsistent," he said. "Then you were told correctly." She moved the cloth in slow, even passes across the surface. "The baseboards on this floor haven't been properly cleaned in at least 6 weeks. The windows were last serviced from the inside about a month ago, from the outside considerably longer. The plant in the corner has been dead for approximately 3 weeks. He set down his pen. "You noticed all of that in 4 minutes. It's the work." She paused. "Observation is part of doing it well. Most people in your position don't approach it that way." She was quiet for a moment. "Most people in my position have worked in this field their whole lives." Another brief pause. "I learned quickly. What did you do before this?" The cloth slowed, then resumed. "Various things," she said. "That's not an answer. It wasn't meant to be one." He almost smiled and caught it. He picked up a document from the nearest stack, a contracts review from the legal department, outlining several maritime agreements the board had provisionally approved during his 3 months at sea. He spread it on the desk and appeared to study it. In reality, he was watching her reflection in the dark glass of his laptop screen. She had moved to the windows and was cleaning the interior panes with a squeegee, working from the top down in smooth, diagonal strokes. As she passed the conference table for the second time, her eyes moved across the contract document lying open there. Not conspicuously, not in any way that would announce itself to a casual observer, but they moved. And then, after a beat, they moved back to the page. "That's a problematic clause," she said. Diego looked up. "I'm sorry?" She nodded toward the contract on the table without stopping her work. Paragraph 14. The force majeure clause. It defines natural disasters broadly, but it excludes port delays caused by federal inspection, which in Veracruz happens to be, statistically, the most common cause of shipping disruption. Whoever drafted that clause did it in someone else's favor. Diego stood up slowly. He walked to the conference table and found paragraph 14. He read it. She was completely correct. He looked at her. She had returned to the windows with perfect composure, squeegee in hand, as if she had not just identified a legal vulnerability in a multi-million peso maritime contract while cleaning glass. "Marisol, sir, how do you know what a force majeure clause is?" A pause. She wrung out the cloth over her bucket with deliberate hands. "I read," she said. "That is also not an answer. You're very concerned with answers today." She glanced at him over her shoulder. For someone whose questions are so carefully constructed, the words landed with the precision of someone who meant them exactly as they sounded. It was not aggression. It was something more unsettling. Accuracy. "You think my questions are calculated?" he said. "I think you are a man who has spent his life asking only the questions he already knows the answer to." She moved the cart methodically toward the far end of the room. "It must be strange, then, to have a question you genuinely don't." He stood there for a long moment. "You're very observant," he said, "for someone whose work is cleaning offices." She picked up a microfiber cloth and turned to face him fully, the first time since entering the room that she had done so without a task directly in front of her as a buffer. Her gaze was measured and clear, with something beneath it that he recognized from the journal without being able to immediately name, the particular watchfulness of someone who had survived something that cost them everything and had not yet decided whether survival was worth the price of continued vigilance. "People underestimate how much you see," she said quietly, "when no one thinks you're looking." The words settled over the office like something that had been waiting a long time to be said aloud. Diego held her gaze. "I expect that's been useful to you. Sometimes." She turned back to her cart and began reorganizing her supplies with focused attention, the universal signal of someone closing a conversation without making it obvious. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Rios?" "Not today." She nodded and began moving toward the door with her cart. "Marisol?" She stopped, did not turn. "The work is excellent. Thank you." A pause. "It's the job," she said. The door closed with a quiet click behind her. Diego stood in the middle of his office and looked at the door for a moment. Then he looked at the conference table, then at paragraph 14 of the maritime contract, visible from across the room. He sat down at the conference table, pulled the document toward him, and read paragraph 14 4 times. Then he reached for his phone and called the head of his legal department. "Armando, the maritime contracts the board approved in my absence. The Transports Garza agreement specifically. Who drafted the force majeure language on paragraph 14? A pause on the line. "That language came from the other party's counsel, Mr. Rios. We flagged it for revision, but the board approved it as presented before the deadline passed." "Who submitted the final vote?" A longer pause this time. "Eduardo Garza's representative, sir." Diego set the phone carefully on the table without ending the call. Eduardo Garza, his oldest partner, his childhood friend, the man who had sat at his right hand in every consequential decision Rios Maritime had made for 15 years. The man who had raised a glass at Diego's 30th birthday and said loudly and sincerely that there was no one in the world he trusted more. "Thank you, Armando," Diego said. "I'll be in touch." He ended the call and sat very still, looking at the gulf through the floor-to-ceiling glass. He thought about page 23 of the journal, the page he had read so many times at sea that he could reproduce it from memory without error. They had someone on the inside, someone with authority, someone the CEO would never question. "I made the mistake of naming him. That was the night everything changed." Diego picked up a pen and wrote one name at the top of a blank sheet of paper. Eduardo Garza. He set the pen down and looked at the name for a long time. The sun was already dropping toward the Gulf. He had been in this office for 6 hours. He had made 7 calls, reviewed 12 documents, and learned more in one afternoon than his board had apparently seen fit to tell him in 11 days of debrief meetings. None of it surprised him as much as the woman who had identified a legal flaw in a contract while cleaning the glass below it. He looked at the door again. He had 76 days of enforced silence to thank for the fact that he could now hear things he had been too loud, too certain, and too comfortable to hear before. The ocean had been a brutal teacher. He was beginning to think it had also sent him a better one. Diego had been told, repeatedly and by people who genuinely meant well, that he had the social grace of a tax audit. He was aware of this. He had simply, for most of his adult life, not considered it a meaningful problem. Grace was for people who needed to be liked. Diego Rios had needed to be effective, and effectiveness had served him perfectly well until it hadn't, until a storm in the Pacific stripped away the ship, and the schedule, and the performance of competence, and left him alone with the uncomfortable reality that efficiency was not the same thing as wisdom. He had tried 3 things in the 4 days following the conversation in his office, and all 3 had failed with an efficiency he might have admired under different circumstances. The first attempt had been professional. He requested through Limpex Servicios that Marisol Vega be reassigned to the executive floor on a permanent basis, citing service quality. The agency complied. She arrived the following morning, reviewed the reassignment paperwork, and within 40 minutes had located the supervisor named Heriberto, and calmly explained that she preferred her previous assignment and would be very grateful to return to it. By 11 o'clock she was back on the 3rd floor. Tomas delivered this information with the carefully neutral expression of a man who was absolutely not laughing. The second attempt had been more direct. Diego happened to be on the 3rd floor at 9 in the morning. Purely coincidentally, he had told himself, in the face of considerable internal evidence to the contrary, and attempted to engage her in conversation about the legal issue she had flagged. She listened to his 4-sentence summary with polite attention, said, "I'm glad it was useful," and resumed cleaning the baseboard near the emergency exit with complete and unshakable focus. "Don't you want to know what I found?" he asked. "You found what I told you you'd find," she said. "You didn't need me to verify it. I may need your perspective on a few other documents." She glanced at him over her shoulder. "Then I'd recommend hiring a lawyer." He stood there for a moment. "You're not even slightly curious? About a maritime contract clause?" She straightened and adjusted her cart without breaking rhythm. "Mr. Rios, I clean offices. What happens with contracts is above my pay grade." "I don't believe that," he said quietly. The words landed differently than he had intended. She went still, just for a moment, not frozen, but still, and when she turned to look at him, something had shifted in her expression. Not alarm, something older than alarm, something that had been maintaining its shape through considerable effort. "What you believe," she said carefully, "doesn't change what is true." And she moved to the next section of baseboard. The 3rd attempt had been, in retrospect, the most poorly conceived. Diego had arranged to be in the small employee cafeteria on the 7th floor at precisely the time she took her lunch break on Thursday. He brought his own coffee and a stack of files, the universal signal of a busy man who happened to be working in this particular location and had not, in any way, engineered this moment. She walked into the cafeteria, saw him, assessed the stack of files, assessed him, and sat down at a table on the opposite side of the room with a small container of food from home and the composure of someone who had faced significantly worse situations than this one. He lasted 11 minutes before crossing the room. "I keep running into you," he said, pulling out the chair across from her. "You keep coming to the places where I am," she replied without looking up from her food. "That's not running into someone. That's following someone." He sat down anyway. "I wanted to ask you something." "You want to ask me a great many things." She finally looked at him, steady, unhurried. "You should know that I intend to keep not answering them." "Why?" "Because I don't know you. You work in my building. I work in a building owned by a company you run." She put her fork down with a quiet, deliberate click. "That is not the same as knowing you, Mr. Rios. I understand that you are a man who gets what he asks for. I understand that this has been the organizing principle of your life for a long time, and that it has served you extremely well. But I am not something to be gotten. I am a person trying to do a job, and I would very much appreciate it if you would let me do it." 4 other people were in the cafeteria. None of them were obviously listening. All of them were. Diego looked at her across the table for a moment. "You're right," he said. "I apologize." She blinked. It was the first time he had visibly surprised her, and he watched the surprise move across her face before she contained it. "That's it," she said. "What were you expecting?" An argument. Another question disguised as an observation. She picked up her fork again. "Possibly a remark about how refreshing I am compared to other women you've met. People like you tend to find resistance charming in a way that doesn't actually respect it." "People like me," he repeated. "Powerful men who have never genuinely been told no." He sat with that for a full beat. "The ocean told me no for 76 days. Something shifted in her expression. Just barely. And I'm still working out what it was saying." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "I know it said something. I just haven't translated it correctly yet." She studied him with the careful attention of someone who has heard something that doesn't fit the pattern they expected and is deciding what to do with that information. "You should finish your coffee," she said finally. "You have a 2 o'clock meeting with the investors, third-floor conference room." He stared at her. "How do you know that?" "I overheard it yesterday." The slightest pause. "I clean the conference rooms." "Right." He stood. "Of course you do." He picked up his coffee and files. At the cafeteria doorway, he stopped and turned back. "Marisol, for what it's worth, I'm not looking for something charming. I'm looking for something true." He left before she could respond. He told himself, walking to the elevator, that he had not timed that exit. He was almost convinced. The investors' meeting ran long and ended poorly. Eduardo Garza arrived 10 minutes late, impeccably dressed in charcoal gray with the particular ease of a man who has never been made to feel the weight of his tardiness. He sat at the opposite end of the table from Diego, and spent the first 40 minutes demonstrating the kind of authoritative confidence that Diego had once found deeply reassuring and now recognized, with the newly sharpened clarity of a man who had spent 76 days with no information except what was actually true, as an extremely polished performance. "The board managed well in your absence," Eduardo said during a lull between presentations. "We protected the company, kept things moving forward." "I noticed," Diego said. Eduardo smiled. It was an excellent smile. Diego had known this man since they were 15 years old at the same Monterrey prep school, and he had never before examined quite how much effort went into producing that smile, or how few of the muscles involved were near the eyes. "Some decisions were made under pressure," Eduardo continued, spreading his hands with practiced openness. "With your input now, we can revisit anything that needs adjustment." "I intend to revisit several things." The investors left satisfied. Eduardo lingered, moving to Diego's end of the table with the unhurried confidence of someone who has always had access. "You seem different," Eduardo said. It was offered as a compliment and carried the faint undercurrent of a question. 76 days tends to do that. They wanted to declare you legally dead, you know. After day 45, the Coast Guard was ready to close the file. Eduardo's voice carried the particular weight of a man presenting a bill for services rendered. "I was the one who kept pushing to extend the search. I want you to know that, Diego." "I appreciate it," Diego said. He kept his voice even and his expression calibrated with the precision of someone who has learned, late in life, the enormous difference between what you feel and what you show. Eduardo believed him. After he left, Diego sat alone in the empty conference room for a long time. He was still sitting there when his phone buzzed with a message from Rodrigo. Armando flagged the Garza contract issue. "Legal team is reviewing 12 other agreements approved in your absence. All have similar structural irregularities. All involve the same counterparty." Proceeding quietly as requested, Diego set the phone face down on the table. Page 23. Someone the CEO would never question. He had known Eduardo Garza for 23 years. She was in the elevator lobby when it happened. Diego was heading to the parking structure, jacket over one arm, reviewing messages on his phone, when he heard the voices. Not raised, but carrying the tense, pressured cadence of a conversation that someone was working to keep contained. He came around the corner into the elevator lobby and found Marisol Vega backed against the wall beside the elevator bank, her cart to one side, facing a woman Diego had not seen in 4 months and had not, at any point during those 4 months, missed. Isabella Montoya. His ex-girlfriend of 3 years looked exactly as she always had. Immaculate, expensive, and absolutely furious beneath several expensive layers of controlled composure. She was speaking in the low, specific voice she reserved for people she considered beneath her attention, a voice Diego had once accepted as confidence, and now recognized as something considerably less appealing. Valentina, Marisol, was standing with her arms at her sides and her chin level, giving away nothing. Her face was completely neutral, not afraid. The face of someone who had survived harder rooms than this elevator lobby. "I don't know what you think you're doing," Isabella was saying, "but whatever this little arrangement is, I want to be very clear." "Isabella." Diego's voice filled the lobby. Both women turned. Isabella's expression transformed in less than a second into something warm and wounded and precisely calculated. "Diego, I've been trying to reach you since you came back. I was so worried. What are you doing in this building?" A small pause in the performance. "I came to see you. Your assistant mentioned you were heading down. You don't have access to this building." He looked toward the security desk, where a young guard was studying his hands with great concentration. "Carlos, please escort Ms. Montoya to the exit." Isabella's warmth evaporated completely. "Diego, I think we should thank you for your concern during my absence," he said. "We will speak another time through Rodrigo's office." He watched until she was through the lobby doors and into the street. Then he turned. Valentina had not moved from her position beside the elevator bank. She was watching him with the same steady, measuring gaze she had produced in the cafeteria, but it held something new now, a question forming behind it that she was not ready to ask and possibly not ready to answer. "Are you all right?" Diego said. "I'm fine." A careful beat. She thought I was someone she recognized. The words were chosen with precision, designed to be entirely plausible and reveal absolutely nothing. Was she correct? Diego asked quietly. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Something moved through her expression, something that lived in the narrow space between fear and decision, between exhaustion and the particular defiance of someone who has been running long enough to know exactly what they are running from. Then it was gone, replaced by the composed professional neutrality she wore like a second uniform. "Good evening, Mr. Rios," she said. She pushed her cart toward the service corridor without looking back. Diego stood in the lobby until the service door settled on its hinges. Carlos at the security desk was very deliberately looking at his desk. Diego's phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from an unknown number, which Rodrigo's security team would trace within the hour and find had been sent from a disposable device registered to no one. It read, "She's not who she says she is. You should ask yourself why she's really there, and you should ask yourself who else already knows she is." He read it 3 times, standing alone in the lobby with the Gulf light dying outside the windows. Then he looked at the service corridor door, still faintly trembling in its frame. Someone had found Valentina Cruz before he had been able to do anything useful about it, and whoever it was knew she was here in his building within reach. The message was not a warning sent to him out of concern. It was sent to tell him that someone else held the same information, and intended to use it first. He had, without realizing it, run out of time to be careful. He put the phone in his pocket and walked to the security desk. "Carlos," he said, "the woman with the cleaning cart who just went through that door. I want to know her schedule for the rest of the week, and I want 2 people on this floor who are not in a uniform and are not on the official staff manifest. Tonight." Carlos looked up, startled. "Sir?" "Tonight," Diego said. He walked to the elevator. He pressed 15 and stood watching the lobby numbers descend as the floors dropped away beneath him, thinking about 67 pages of handwriting, and a 4-year-old girl named Camilla, and a woman who had survived everything that had been done to her with a dignity so absolute that she had managed to turn invisibility into armor. Whatever was coming, she was not going to face it alone, not if he had anything to say about it. And for the first time in a very long time, Diego Rios had quite a lot to say. The call came at 4:47 in the morning. Diego was already awake. He had been awake since 3, which had become his standard since the rescue, his body still governed by the rhythms of a man who had learned that sleep on the open ocean was a luxury borrowed from fate in small, uncertain increments. He was at his desk at home in the Boca del Rio house, reviewing the documents Rodrigo had sent over, when the phone screen lit up with a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Rios." The voice on the line was male, middle-aged, carefully controlled. "My name is Lick Fuentes. I represent the interests of Eduardo Garza. I'm calling to discuss a matter of mutual sensitivity before it becomes a matter of public record." Diego set down his pen. "Go ahead. It has come to our attention that you have been conducting informal inquiries into certain contracts approved during your absence. We understand this is your right as CEO. We are also aware that you have taken a personal interest in a contracted cleaning employee working in your building under an assumed identity. A deliberate pause. We would like to suggest that these two matters are best kept entirely separate, for everyone's benefit. When you say everyone, Diego said, do you mean Eduardo Garza's benefit specifically? I mean the benefit of the company, its investors, and anyone whose safety depends on maintaining current arrangements undisturbed. The words whose safety landed with the weight they were designed to carry. I appreciate the call, Diego said. Don't make another one. He ended the connection and sat in the dark for 60 seconds, which was how long it took to move from the specific coldness of a credible threat to the specific clarity of a man who has decided to stop being cautious. He called Rodrigo at 5 in the morning without apology. I need everything on Eduardo Garza's business relationships for the last 3 years. Every contract, every subsidiary, every associated party. I need it documented, sourced, and ready for a legal filing within 72 hours. Diego. And I need a private security detail on Valentina Cruz, the woman working as Marisol Vega at the building, beginning immediately. Completely discreet. She cannot know it's there. If she finds out, she won't trust it. I know. Do it anyway. He paused. Rodrigo, someone called me at 5 in the morning to suggest that her safety was a negotiable variable. I will not permit that. Silence on the line. Then, understood. 72 hours. He saw her at 8 that morning, purely by the logic of a building they both occupied. She was crossing the lobby with her cart when he stepped off the elevator, and she stopped when she saw his face. You look like you haven't slept, she said. I haven't. She studied him for a moment. Is it the company? Partly. He looked at her steadily. Marisol, I need you to tell me if anything unusual happened yesterday evening after you left the lobby. Anyone who spoke to you. Anyone who followed you. The cart handle under her hands didn't move, but her knuckles whitened by a shade. Nothing happened, she said. Valentina. The name fell between them like a stone into still water. She went completely motionless. The lobby around them continued. Elevator bells, the front desk phone, footsteps across marble. But within the radius of the two of them, everything stilled. Don't, she said very quietly. I read your journal. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, something behind her gaze had changed. Not broken, not collapsed, but fundamentally altered in the way that the structure of something changes when the thing it was built to contain is no longer a secret. How? She said. Not a question. The word of someone solving for the single variable that makes every other fact coherent. The Pacific. He held her gaze. A debris field on day 47. A sealed container. I read every word. I've carried it for 2.5 months. She looked at him. Really looked at him, for the first time without the careful management of the professional neutral mask. What he saw underneath it was not fragility. It was something much harder than that. The face of someone who had survived 3 years of deliberate erasure and arrived at a place of such self-possessed endurance that even being found didn't make her flinch. But her voice, when it came, was barely above a threshold. Camilla? Safe, he said immediately. I haven't contacted your aunt. I didn't know if it was safe to make contact, but I found the address in the journal. If you tell me to reach out, I will do it in the next 10 minutes. She turned away from him. She pressed her hand flat against the lobby wall and stood that way for 15 seconds, breathing. He waited. He had learned in 76 days of having nothing to do but wait, that silence was not wasted time. When she turned back, her eyes were dry and her chin was level. They know I'm here, she said. It was not a question. Yes. Someone called you. This morning, 4:47. Something moved through her expression. A dark, unsurprised recognition. Eduardo Garza, his lawyer. She exhaled slowly. Then I need to leave. No. The word came out with more force than he intended. I need you to trust me for 72 hours. I need you to continue your regular schedule as if nothing has changed, and I need you to understand that I am aware of the situation, and I am addressing it. She looked at him for a long, searching moment. Why should I trust you? You run the company that destroyed my life. I know. He held her gaze without flinching. I know that. And I know that you have no reason to believe that I'm different from every other person in that company who chose comfort over honesty. I am asking you anyway. 72 hours. After that, if you want to disappear, I will help you do it, and I will never follow you. The lobby continued around them. Nobody watching would have understood what was happening in the space between these two people. The specific gravity of a moment when someone who has been running long enough to be permanently exhausted is offered, by the last person they expected, the possibility of standing still. 72 hours, she said. Thank you. She picked up the card handle. This doesn't mean I trust you. I know. It means I'm considering the evidence. That's enough, he said. She walked toward the service corridor. He watched her go, then turned toward the elevator bank and pressed 15 with the firm, unhesitating intention of a man who has located the exact problem and is now solving it in the only direction that matters. Eduardo Garza arrived at the Rios Maritime building at 2 that afternoon for what he believed was a routine portfolio review. He walked through the lobby with the easy authority of a man who has belonged to a place for 15 years, rode the elevator to 15, and entered the conference room to find not the 4-member board he had expected, but Diego Rios, Rodrigo Peña, the head of the company's internal legal team, and 2 representatives from the Federal Financial Crimes Authority. He stopped in the doorway. Eduardo, Diego said. Come in. Close the door. What is this? Eduardo's voice was controlled. Excellent reflexes. Even now. This is a conversation about 47 contracts approved during my absence, 11 of which contain structural language that systematically benefits a single counterparty. It is a conversation about the movement of certain accounts belonging to 3 company subsidiaries during a period coinciding exactly with my disappearance at sea. And it is a conversation about a maritime law attorney named Valentina Cruz, who was removed from her position at a Veracruz law firm 3 years ago, following a series of allegations that our legal team has now had 48 hours to examine carefully. Diego's voice remained completely even throughout. Please sit down. Eduardo sat. He sat for 4 hours. She found out at 7 that evening. Rodrigo had insisted on telling her directly under the reasoning, which Diego accepted, that she had the right to know what was being said and done in her name without having it filtered through someone else. Diego waited in the hallway outside the small meeting room on the 6th floor because he understood that this was not his moment to be present. When Rodrigo came out, his expression was carefully neutral. She would like to speak to you, he said. Diego went in. Valentina was seated at the conference table with both hands flat in front of her, the specific body language of someone who has just had a large and complicated emotional event and is managing its aftermath through sheer structural discipline. She did not look up immediately when he entered. When she did, her eyes were red at the rims, which she had clearly done nothing to conceal. He had been moving against you for 2 years, she said, before I found the contracts, before I said anything. Yes. He had me removed because I was going to find it eventually. Her voice was level. It cost her something to keep it that way, not because I did anything wrong, because I was going to be capable of doing something right. Yes, 3 years. She pressed her hands flat against the table surface. 3 years of Camilla growing up with my aunt because I was too afraid to let anyone know where I was. 3 years of not being her mother in the way she needed because this man... She stopped, started again. Because I trusted the wrong people. Diego sat down across from her. He did not speak. There was nothing useful to say, and he had learned enough in the last 11 days and long before that on the open water to know when silence was more respectful than words. After a moment, she looked at him. Why? She said. You had nothing to gain from protecting me. You didn't know me. You could have used the information in the journal and left me out of it entirely. Diego looked at his hands. On day 53, he said, I was running out of water. There was a storm coming, and I had been unable to catch rain for 4 days, and I had run every rational calculation available to me, and the conclusion was not good. He looked up. I read the journal again that night, not for the first time. I read the parts about Camilla, the parts about your aunt, the parts about the law firm and what you'd found and what it had cost you. He paused. I made a decision that night that if I got back to land, whatever I came back to do with the time I had left, this was part of it. It was not a complicated decision. It was just a true one. She held his gaze for a long, silent moment. You're very strange, she finally said, for someone who runs a shipping empire. 76 days, he said. Does that explain everything? Most of it. She looked at the table. He heard her breathe. I want to see my daughter, she said quietly. I want to call my aunt tonight and tell her that it's safe. Rodrigo can arrange secure transport to Oaxaca tomorrow morning, Diego said. Discreet. No one will know. She nodded. A long silence stretched between them that was not uncomfortable, the silence of 2 people who have said the most important things and are resting in the fact of having said them. 72 hours, she said. You trusted me for the full 72 hours. Don't make it a bigger victory than it is. But she said it quietly, and some of the absolute hardness around the words had gone somewhere else. He stood. Rest tonight. Tomorrow, Camilla. A pause at the door. Everything else can wait. He left. Valentina sat for a long time in the quiet conference room, her hands flat on the table and her eyes toward the window and the gulf beyond it. Dark now and enormous and indifferent and, against every expectation she had carried for 3 years, no longer the thing she was most afraid of. Camilla was 5 years old, with her mother's dark eyes and her Aunt Carmen's stubborn mouth and no patience whatsoever for formalities. She launched herself at Valentina in the doorway of the small house on Calle Nochebuena in Oaxaca de Juarez before Valentina had finished climbing out of the car, and Valentina caught her with the specific completeness of someone who has been carrying the precise shape of this absence in their arms for 3 years, and finally has it filled. Diego stood at the vehicle and looked at the cobblestone street and gave them the only thing he could, the understanding that this moment was not his. Aunt Carmen appeared in the doorway a moment later, a small, upright woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone who had made peace with life's harder arrangements without ever approving of them. She looked at Diego with the frank, assessing gaze of a woman who has protected something valuable from the world for a long time and is now taking careful inventory of the latest thing the world has sent to her door. You're the one from the company, she said. Yes. My niece trusted people from that company before. I know, Diego said. That is a fact I am entirely aware of. Carmen looked at him for a long moment. Coffee? She said finally. Please. He sat at the kitchen table while Valentina and Camilla occupied the small sala visible through the open doorway, the child talking at tremendous speed, Valentina answering in the voice of someone drinking water after a very long time without it. Carmen put coffee in front of Diego and sat across from him with her own cup, and they did not speak for a while. The sounds from the sala filled the silence between them naturally. She was one of the best maritime attorneys in Veracruz, Carmen said eventually. Before all of this, I know. They didn't fire her for incompetence. Carmen's voice was measured and specific. They fired her for being right. There's a difference. There is. Diego agreed. Carmen studied him over her coffee cup. What are you going to do about it? I'm already doing it. What does doing it look like when it's finished? Diego looked at his coffee. It looks like the people who did this to her facing a legal accounting for it, in a process that is on the public record, so that it cannot be quietly buried. He paused. And it looks like her having every option that was taken from her returned to her, to do with as she chooses. Carmen held his gaze for a long time. She had the particular evaluative stillness of someone who has spent years learning to measure the gap between what people say and what they mean. She won't go back to being who she was, Carmen said finally. That version of her doesn't exist anymore. 3 years does that to a person. I know, Diego said. I'm not asking her to go back. I'm asking for the space to go forward. Carmen picked up her coffee. She did not say anything further on the subject, but something in the angle of her shoulders shifted. A very small, very deliberate change, the kind made by someone who has rendered a private judgment and chosen, provisionally, to wait and see. They returned to Veracruz the following afternoon, after a night that allowed Valentina to sleep for the first time in weeks, in a bed she had actually chosen to be in, with Camilla pressed against her side and the sound of Carmen's radio faint through the wall, the ordinary sounds of a life that had waited patiently for her to come back to it. On the drive back, Valentina was quiet for the first hour and then spoke without preamble, as if continuing a conversation that had been running in her head for some time. His name was Leek, Ramon Vidal, she said. He was the senior partner at the firm. I had been there for 4 years. I found irregularities in a group of cargo insurance claims. Fraudulent, I was certain of it. Coordinated across 3 different clients over 18 months. The claims all ran through a single maritime company. Rios Maritime, Diego said. Yes. She looked at the road ahead. I brought it to Vidal. I genuinely believed that he would be as troubled by it as I was. He wasn't troubled. He was very, very careful. She paused. 2 weeks later, the irregularities were reclassified as processing errors. My contract was terminated. The allegations that followed, professional misconduct, falsified documentation, were filed so quickly and cleanly that I understood immediately that they had been prepared in advance. Garza, Diego said. His company was the principal beneficiary of the insurance claims. Vidal was his legal counsel on 3 of the related contracts. She exhaled slowly. I tried twice to file formally. Both times the documentation disappeared before it reached the next desk. I had a 4-year-old daughter and no income, and a professional record that had been surgically destroyed. A long pause. So I made myself small. I took the only work I could take. I kept moving, until you ended up in my building. It wasn't entirely an accident, she said, and something in her voice was almost wry. I wanted to be close to the documentation, even as Marisol Vega, even cleaning baseboards and identifying force majeure clauses. The almost wry quality sharpened slightly. I thought if I was patient enough and invisible enough, eventually I would find the thread I needed. And instead, Diego said, the thread found you. She looked at him sideways. You were drifting in the Pacific for 76 days, she said. I'm not sure you qualify as a thread. 76 days builds character. It apparently also builds a talent for dramatic entries. He almost smiled. He let himself this time. How am I doing with the dramatic entry? She was quiet for a moment. Better than I expected, she said. It was not nothing. From her, he was beginning to understand it was quite close to everything. The formal legal filing was submitted to the Federal Financial Crimes Authority on a Thursday morning, 48 hours after Eduardo Garza's conference room meeting. It contained 114 pages of documented evidence, 11 witness statements, and a set of communication records that Rodrigo's team had assembled with meticulous, merciless care. Garza's legal response arrived within 6 hours. Aggressive, expensive, and precisely the response of someone who has retained counsel in advance of a storm. His lawyers filed counter-allegations involving Diego's management of the company during his absence, his relationship with a contracted employee, and questions about his mental fitness following a traumatic maritime incident. The last item was submitted to the board with a formal request for a competency review. Diego read it in the conference room on the 15th floor, alone with both hands flat on the table and the Gulf gray and enormous through the windows. He read it twice. He set it down. He sat still for 4 minutes. Valentina found him there. She had been given a temporary office on the 6th floor, her presence in the building now official, her identity no longer in question, her status a matter that the HR department was navigating with considerable nervous energy. She knocked on the open conference room door and came in without waiting, which was new, and which he noted with the specific attention of a man who marks every change in the behavior of someone who has spent 3 years being deliberately cautious about where she walks. She read his expression. She looked at the document on the table. She picked it up and read it without asking. Mental fitness, she said. The maritime incident. They're suggesting the ocean compromised your judgment. She set the document down. And that I am the evidence of compromised judgment. That appears to be the argument. She stood across the table from him. The afternoon light through the Gulf-facing windows fell across her in the particular way it did in the late afternoon. Not gold exactly. Something more complex than that. The light of a coastal city that has been watching the water for a very long time. When I was on the boat, she said quietly, before the storm hit, I made every decision correctly. I secured the documents. I got the container sealed before the water reached the cabin. I did everything right. She paused. The ocean didn't care. It took the boat anyway. She looked at him across the table. I've spent 3 years believing that doing everything right was not enough, that the problem was me, that I was too small, too inexperienced, too easy to remove. Diego said nothing. I was wrong about that, she said. Not about what happened, about what it meant. She set her hands flat on the table in the posture he had come to recognize. Not resignation, but resolution. I want to testify. In the formal hearing, on the record, he held her gaze. Valentina, on the record, she repeated. Under my name, my real credentials. Everything I found, everything that happened, everything they did to make it disappear. Her voice was steady with the kind of steadiness that is not the absence of fear but its presence, faced directly, without flinching. I spent 3 years being Marisol Vega. I would like to stop. Something shifted in Diego's chest. The specific shift of a man who has spent his whole life surrounded by people performing strength, and is now, for the first time in a very long time, in the presence of the actual thing. Are you certain? He said. No, she said. Ask me again in 5 minutes and I'll give you the same answer. Then I'll call Rodrigo. She nodded. And then quietly, barely above the threshold of audible, thank you. For the ocean. He looked at her across the table in the Gulf afternoon light. "Thank you for the journal," he said. The federal hearing lasted 4 days. On the first day, Rodrigo presented the financial documentation, 114 pages that mapped with the precision of someone who has spent 30 years finding the stories that numbers tell. The full architecture of Eduardo Garza's 18-month campaign to redirect company funds, manipulate insurance claims, and systematically remove the people capable of discovering it. The 2 federal representatives asked careful questions. Garza's lawyers objected frequently. The objections were noted and denied with the efficiency of a process that had already decided, based on the weight of the evidence, where it was going. On the second day, Diego testified. He was direct and specific and refused at several points the committee's invitation to frame events in terms that would have made him look better. He said what was true. He said it without embellishment. His lawyers were briefly alarmed. Rodrigo was not. On the third day, Valentina Cruz testified. She entered the hearing room in a dark blazer, and her own name and the specific bearing of a maritime attorney who had been practicing invisible discipline for 3 years, and was now converting all of it into the most controlled and devastating professional performance Diego had ever witnessed. She presented her original findings in full, the insurance claims, the communication records, the timeline of her removal, the nature of the allegations fabricated against her. She answered every question with the precise, measured articulation of someone who has been preparing this testimony for 3 years, without knowing when it would be given. When the opposing counsel attempted to suggest that her findings were the work of a disgruntled former employee with a personal agenda, she paused for exactly 2 seconds. "My agenda," she said, "is that the truth is documented and preserved. I believe you'll find that it still is." On the 4th day, the committee issued its preliminary findings. Eduardo Garza was placed under formal federal investigation. Licensure Ramon Vidal's license was suspended pending review. 3 board members who had approved the problematic contracts during Diego's absence resigned before the morning session began. The counter-allegations involving Diego's competency were dismissed in a single paragraph that Rodrigo described, with quiet satisfaction, as surgical. Carmen arrived from Oaxaca with Camila on a Friday afternoon, 4 days after the hearing closed. Camila descended upon the Rios Maritime Building lobby with the absolute confidence of a 5-year-old who has been told that this is where her mother works, and has therefore decided, on principle, that it belongs to her. She examined the revolving door, the security desk, and Carlos specifically, with the evaluative focus of a small person taking inventory of a new territory. Carlos, who managed the entrances and exits of powerful people with unfailing professionalism, was completely destabilized by her. "Is there a fish?" Camila asked him, looking at the lobby fountain. No, there isn't currently a fish, but there should be one. I'll make a note of that." Valentina watched this exchange from the lobby stairs with her hand over her mouth. Diego stood beside her. "She's exactly like you," he said. "She's 5. She identified an institutional deficiency and suggested a concrete solution." He kept his voice entirely straight. "Sounds familiar?" She pressed her lips together. "Don't. I'm just noting the methodological consistency. 1 more word and I'm going back to cleaning the 3rd floor. You have a law degree and a federal testimony on the public record. And a very comfortable cleaning cart," she said. And there it was, the real version of the almost wry quality he had been catching glimpses of for weeks. The full one, the one that lived underneath everything she'd built to survive. He held it for a moment the way you hold something you were afraid you'd never find. Carmen had crossed the lobby to where they were standing, and was watching them both with the patient attentiveness of a woman who has made a provisional judgment and is watching it be confirmed. "The building is very big," Carmen said to Diego. "It's manageable," he said. "My niece finds large, complicated things manageable," Carmen said. "She's been doing it since she was 12. The question is always whether the large, complicated thing in question deserves the effort." Diego held her gaze steadily. "I intend to spend however long is required demonstrating that it does." Carmen considered this. "Good coffee," she said, nodding toward the cafeteria level. "I noticed on my way in." "I'll take you up," Diego said. Carmen walked toward the elevator. Diego started after her, then stopped and turned back to Valentina, who was watching him with the measuring look, the real one, not the professional one, that he had been trying to earn since the first morning on the 3rd floor. "I need to ask you something," he said. "That's how all your worst ideas start," she said. This one is different. You always believe that. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. Not a ring. He had thought carefully about this and decided, with the logic of a man who had learned in 76 days that grand gestures were less trustworthy than true ones, that a ring in a conference room was not what this moment was. What he held instead was a folded piece of paper, soft at the creases from having been folded and unfolded many times. She looked at it. Something in her face changed. "That's page 1, he said. "I had it transcribed before the original was submitted to the federal record." He held it out. "It belongs to you." She took it with both hands and held it without opening it. "Valentina," he said, "I would like to keep finding out who you are. I would like to do that with your permission, at whatever pace makes sense to you. And I would like the record to show that I am asking as someone who understands exactly what I am asking for and is not under any illusions about what it costs." She was looking at the folded paper in her hands. "You are the most formal man," she said, "when you are being the most serious. It's a character flaw, among others." She looked up. "I have a daughter who has informed the security guard that the lobby needs a fish. My aunt is already in your elevator. I have not been a lawyer in 3 years, and I have been Marisol Vega for most of that time. And before all of that, I was a person who trusted badly." She paused. "I am not a simple project. I ran a maritime company into a Pacific storm and was adrift for 76 days, Diego said. "I have some experience with complicated." She looked at him for a long moment. "The answer is yes," she said. "Ask me properly later somewhere without a security desk audience. But the answer is yes." He looked over his shoulder. Carlos was facing determinedly forward. 3 passing employees had discovered urgent business on the far side of the lobby. "Very discreet," Diego said. "Tell that to Carlos." The formal federal ruling against Eduardo Garza came 6 months later, on a Thursday morning in November. He was found liable on 9 counts of financial fraud, 2 counts of obstruction of justice, and 1 count of deliberate falsification of professional allegations against a third party. The court's language on the final count was notably direct. The financial penalties were substantial. The reputational outcome was complete and permanent. Lucien Ramon Vidal's license was permanently revoked. He returned to a provincial practice in Hidalgo and was, in the language of people who track these things, never heard from professionally again. The 3 board members who had resigned received settlements conditioned on their departure from the maritime industry. They accepted. Isabella Montoya filed a civil action against Diego for breach of an implied commitment, which Rodrigo handled in 30 days with the efficiency of someone closing a chapter that should have been closed considerably earlier. She moved to Mexico City and, by all accounts, did extremely well for herself. The city suited her. Diego bore her no ill will and expended 0 energy on the subject. Aunt Carmen moved to Veracruz at Valentina's invitation and took up residence in a house 4 streets from the ocean, where she expressed polite but firm opinions about the garden, the kitchen layout, and Diego's decision-making on several occasions. He found her indispensable. Camilla determined around the same time that the building did in fact need a fish, and made her case in a formal presentation, illustrated with a poster board, to Diego's executive team. Tomas, who had been Diego's assistant for 3 years, and had never been formally destabilized by anything, required several minutes to compose himself after reading the poster board's conclusion. A fish would make everyone less stressed. This is a fact. The lobby fountain did not get a fish. It did get a very good aquatic plant, which Camilla accepted as a provisional concession pending further negotiation. He proposed in January on the Malecon at Veracruz in the early morning before the city fully woke up, which was the time they had both discovered they preferred, the specific quiet of a coastal city when the light was new, and the Gulf was flat and silver, and the world had not yet started asking anything of anyone. "I told you to ask properly," she said, looking at the ring. "That means somewhere without an audience. There's no one here. There's a fisherman 300 meters that way. He's not watching. He's absolutely watching." She looked at Diego across the small distance the Malecon allowed between them. Her hair was loose and the Gulf wind was doing something complicated with it, and she was wearing the expression she wore in the moments when she had stopped managing what she showed. Open, specific, exactly herself. "You're very bad at this," she said. "The ocean didn't cover romantic proposals. That seems like a significant oversight in your 76-day education. I'll note it for next time." "There won't be a next time," she said, and took the ring. He put it on her finger and they stood on the Malecon in the January morning light. the gulf wide and silver in front of them, the city beginning to stir at their backs, neither of them speaking for a while because some things require silence to be properly understood. "Page 1, she said eventually. "What made you keep it?" "I kept all of it," he said. "The whole journal. I still have it. I will always have it." He paused. "It told me who you were before I met you. Every decision after that was just paying attention." She leaned against the Malecon railing and looked at the water. "The ocean is very large," she said, "and very occasionally useful. Don't romanticize nearly dying. I'm romanticizing what came after." She looked at him. "It was 67 pages, she said, written by someone who thought no one would ever read them, who was trying to leave something behind in case." She stopped, restarted. "I never thought those pages would be the thing that changed anything." "They changed everything," he said. She was quiet for a moment. The Gulf was coming alive with morning light, and somewhere behind them Veracruz was beginning its day, and in a house 4 streets from the ocean, a woman who had rebuilt a life from the pieces of a harder one was sleeping with her daughter beside her and her aunt's radio faint through the wall. "Valentina Cruz," Diego said. "Maritime attorney, former cleaning professional, discoverer of force majeure flaws, terrible secret keeper. I kept the secret for 3 years, and the best argument the ocean has ever made." He held out his hand. "Shall we go home?" She took his hand. They walked back through the January morning toward the city and the building, and the life they had both, from opposite ends of an enormous and indifferent ocean, been working their way toward for considerably longer than either of them had planned. The fisherman 300 meters away lowered his rod and watched them go, and shook his head in the particular way of someone who has just witnessed something they will tell as a story later, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was unmistakably, irrevocably true.